Okay, and I think we're live. Excuse me. Uh, got a bit of a. Just let me take a swig of water. All right, so I'll wait for people to trickle in. Those of you who are in the United States, and hopefully, I actually checked on the analytics for my channel, and it's kind of. Hey, Alejandro. Yeah, I probably won't be talking about that for the most part. I might get towards that um, by the end of the video, but we'll see. Hey Tim, um, I checked the analytics for my channel, and I think it's somewhere around 20% of the people that actually watch these videos as a result of notifications. I don't know how accurate that is. I'm always a little leery of trusting YouTube, but apparently it's like around a quarter or 20% of the people who get notifications. The people who watch the videos are coming out as a result of that. So it's always interesting to see who watched my videos. I saw someone on Twitter the other day who did not appreciate my live streams, but apparently that person is watching. So I think in the end, that's what counts. If people are actually listening to the message. That's how I felt when me and some brethren from church went out to Diversity Plaza in Queens. As long as people were actually hearing the gospel, I think that was the main point. Um, it's kind of interesting. David Wood is back in action. I don't know those of you who are aware. He took about a year long break, maybe a little bit less than a year, to lose some weight. He has a family history of heart disease, so he lost about 60 pounds, and he's become incredibly mellow ever since ever since he took this little sabbatical. I think that happens when people take time off from the internet and detox from all of the vitriol and acrimony that you find online, particularly social media. you start to you start to have a healthier sense of self and detach from these uh, very toxic and hateful interactions. Yeah, 60 pounds. 60 pounds is a huge number. I know the actor and comedian Godfrey Cambridge. Unfortunately, he died, uh, but he lost 80 or 90 pounds within a month. This is much more gradual, it seems. He did this over the course of a few months, and he looks much healthier. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. I was just waiting for people to trickle in, but I wanted to talk about, yeah, the title. The title is very apocalyptic, and I might get to that if I have time. But I just want to talk a little bit about the um, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or which really is accurate this time. It's not just um, a, a dispute between Hamas and Israel. Hamas has kind of capitalized on this to spark outbreaks within Israel itself, and to a lesser extent the West Bank. They've had these communal uh, this communal violence within Lod and some other Israeli cities. You've had attempted lynchings and burn uh, burning synagogues, and it's sort of reminiscent of the riots you saw in Hebron and Jerusalem back during the the days of the British Mandate. Hi, Tower Time. During the British Mandate, right when Britain had control of this area after World War II, had control of the Transjordan and and the British Mandate of Palestine, you had these intercommunal clashes, and most of the time it was Arab Muslims attacking Jewish settlers. So you had these huge riots and attacks in order to prevent the Jewish state from emerging. For World War I, and there've been a lot of comparisons to that in the media, and it's one of the interesting things about this is the reaction, and I'll look at that more than the actual violence, but the reaction to the violence from the rest of the world, and particularly in the U.S. There was a really funny video mocking the people who all of a sudden Palestine, Israel Palestine experts. Whenever this they sort of ignore this conflict for 99% of the year, and the 1% of the year where you have something like Hamas shooting rockets into Israel or riots taking place outside of the Al Aqsa Mosque. You you have these people who step in and become pundits on the Arab Israeli conflict and opine as to what the proper solution is. And it's kind of funny. And I'm not going to profess to be an expert, even though I've been following this for years. but it's just kind of interesting, the expert analysis. And one of the problems I have with it, particularly the critique of Israel's actions, is that a lot of it I don't necessarily view it as a sincere or authentic critique. For example, the demands that Israel scale back their retaliatory strikes, or they don't retaliate against Hamas because Hamas is militarily weaker than Israel. For example, Israel has a first-class army. It has the Iron Dome system, which has been bankrolled by the United States in order to those incoming missiles. And as an aside, this is another really ridiculous idea that the Iron Dome is prolonging the conflict. In other words, defending people from being attacked is prolonging a conflict. This was one of the same arguments that critics of the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, made. The idea that preventing missiles from coming into the United States was somehow USSR or or the PRC or some enemy of the United States that in a war scenario might send ICBMs into the United States, that this was an adjutant, that this was going to cause more conflict. Somehow defending U.S. citizens was going to cause a bigger, which is really ridiculous, especially when you look at the actual results. The fact that there is a defense system what's preventing Israel from pursuing, or one of the things that's preventing Israel from pursuing, a land invasion. So the fact that you don't have tanks rolling through Gaza and causing even more casualties, that's a direct result of the Iron Dome system. Uh, and you can actually see it in the casualty figures. I think there were 200 deaths on the Palestinian side and 10 deaths on the Israeli side, whereas in something like Operation Protective Edge, or the past two invasions in 2014 and I believe 2008, you had massive casualties. You had over 1,000 casualties on the Palestinian side, I believe, is actually hastening a quicker resolution. The fact that Israel doesn't need to send in the IDF, actually send in ground troops. But you have a lot of these criticisms of the Israeli reaction, and no, you didn't miss it. It's only been 10 minutes, and I think one of the problems I have is that it doesn't acknowledge reality. So putting aside the quote unquote root causes, whatever you believe the root causes to be, if a country is getting shelled with rockets, they're going to try to end the rockets. And this idea of proportional force sort of goes out the window. I mean, at least in any other context. So uh, when when uh, when Tanzania had repeated, albeit futile and unsuccessful, invasion attempts by Uganda, when Idi Amin was trying to invade and destabilize Tanzania, Tanzania just invaded and deposed him. It didn't. It didn't. It didn't weigh the relative merits of how how much violence it would cause, or how many, and how much violence it would cause, or how many casualties it wouldn't incur. It just said this guy's a psychopath, and he's trying to destabilize our country, and it would be better if he disappears. So eventually, they came in and deposed him, and he wound up dying in exile in Saudi Arabia. And this is the reaction of most countries when they're being attacked. I mean, I'm sure if Mexico was launching the equivalent of Qassam rockets into Amarillo, 1,000 of them each day. After the 10th or 11th rocket barrage, and trying to resolve it diplomatically, I mean, there would probably be military repercussions. Notwithstanding the huge Mexican American community in the U.S. and the diplomatic relations, there would probably be a military response of some kind if it persisted. And I think this is the thing that the don't really understand. And I think, and this is not true of everyone, but I think to a large extent it's because the criticism is not really sincere. I mean, that particular criticism, the idea that you can't punch down, or that you need to, or that whoever's the weaker party is necessarily the party that's in the right, I think is this sort of um, bizarre cultural Marxist idea that regardless of what other provocation is present, that you should that anyone who's European, anyone who's white, anyone who's Western, in the case of Israel, anyone who's coded as white or Western, because they're not Islamic, they're not from the third world, they have a very prosperous, highly sophisticated society, that those people are automatically in the wrong, even if they're the ones being aggressed upon. It's a really bizarre sort of leftist, and you can see this applied throughout society. Um, Particularly when you have leftists analyze the settlement of the United States, or the settlement of Australia. And I'm not saying there aren't any legitimate critiques of these things, but these people are automatically perceived to be, initiating genocide and and oppression, because of the fact that they're more technologically sophisticated, or they have values that are inimical to the modern left. It doesn't really make any sense. um, it does not it doesn't really make any sense when you actually put it in this context. And I think it's not it's not really sincere, although there are a lot of sincere critiques. I would be a lot more amenable to this line of attack if you criticize if you said, well, our foreign policy conflicts in certain areas. For example, Syria, there Israel's conflict with Iran, the Shia Muslim proxies in neighboring countries conflicts with our desire to eliminate Sunni jihadism and Al Qaeda and ISIS and groups like that. And therefore, we can't be, we have to diverge in that area. Or we shouldn't be, we should just end all foreign aid and we shouldn't be sending money, sending military aid to support these countries. And if this were a consistent line of argument, then I think it would be perfectly appropriate. But the thing, and there are libertarians, consistent libertarians, who take this line of argument. But the problem is, most of the people don't look at it that way. They just look at it as a country they don't like, and therefore they are they are wrong about this, regardless of what the externalities are. Yeah, but it's not that's the thing. Jerusalem is part of Israel. It's not it's not if Israel had invaded Damascus and just started unprovoked, if Israel had just invaded Damascus and started um, attacking monuments and high-rise buildings, then yeah, you might have a point, but you don't you don't, since it's within the analogy doesn't quite work out. Um, but yeah, see, so like if those sorts of critiques, they're very legitimate critiques of Israel and our relationship with Israel in terms of our foreign policy. But the thing is, that's not what most people are using in order to delegitimize the Israeli response in this scenario. The AOC thing is kind of amusing. Here you have this bartender from the Bronx, from quote unquote the Bronx. Really, it's Westchester. But you have this, limousine liberal airhead who's a bartender, and presumably she doesn't share any other Islamic values. And this is a great example of what I'm talking about. She doesn't share any other Islamic values other than she's not silent as a woman. She doesn't veil herself. She's not chaste, and she's not willing to engage in a polygamous relationship with a man. And yet, the one Islamic value she shares is hating Israel, which it's very convenient. It's very convenient for her when you look at it. And she even described Al Aqsa as a holy mosque or something. She made some ridiculous statement in the press, which she made some ridiculous statement in the press, which something along the lines of the Israelis transgressing the holy mosque of Al Aqsa. And I'm thinking to myself, when was the last time? When was the last time AOC veiled herself and went into a mosque to pray to Allah? This is a woman who makes star charts. This is one of those ridiculous millennial women who make star charts in order to guide her life, because she doesn't understand who God is and has never opened up the Bible. It's another great example of the very this contingent criticism of Israel and their actions during this conflict. And again, Um, I would be more receptive if it were this consistent criticism instead of just a instead of just relying on these arguments when it's convenient for you to attack Israel and not applying it across the board to other allies we have that we send money to or send foreign aid to, or that have foreign policies that might conflict with those of the United States. But I mean, one of the and here I'll try. I'll get to the title of the show. One of the most ridiculous criticisms, and this is something I saw on Michael Tracy's Twitter the other day, is that the only reason we're supporting Israel is because evangelical Christians believe. And he was attacking premillennial dispensationalism, and I should note, Tracy is one of these fedora atheists who thinks everything that Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and the late Christopher Hitchens said is gospel. They take it as gospel, and they've never actually investigated the the claims of the Bible. They've never actually looked into it themselves, and they just denigrate whatever Christians happen to believe. So he went on this rant on Twitter attacking evangelical support for Israel, and particularly this particular eschatological view that excuse me, that namely premillennial dispensationalism, which holds to the rapture, and the main reason that the United States supported Israel. So the fact that there are however many 40 million evangelicals within the US, and they exert a lobbying pressure on the United States to continue to support Israel. Otherwise, we would presumably be on the side of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And there are a number of flaws with this reasoning. One of them is that even if there were no evangelical Christians in the United States, you would still have to confront the issue of what's the alternative. Say you dislike all of Israel's domestic policies and foreign policies, and you don't think we should support it. What would be the alternative, and what would that portend for the United States? The alternative would be, in the best case scenario, it would be a hostile Muslim state, perhaps run by Fatah, which might be manageable. But the more likely scenario is that it would be an Islamic state run by either Hamas or some joint Hamas Sunni jihadist coalition. And that the United States would still not be this. The United States would still not be. It would not be a good scenario for the United States. So even take out the idea of a Jewish state. Say Israel was run by Hindus or Buddhists or any other religious or religious ethnic group that was non-Muslim. It would still be more likely that the United States would ally with it than an Islamic state, which produces people that, yes, they hate Israel, but they also hate the United States, and they hate um, they hate. So it would the most likely scenario would be in a hostile Islamic state. All right, see you. Oh, okay. As an aside, the Gaza, the concentration camp thing. This is something I wanted to get to as well. And I just the reason. First of all, it was also blockaded by Egypt. So the idea that Israel is the sole reason that it was closed off is erroneous. And Egypt blockaded it because they despise the Muslim Brotherhood. And again, like I said, you would not want a Muslim Brotherhood or an Islamic state there, regardless of who you are, unless you were another country whose policies aligned with that, which wouldn't be the United States, or in this case, Egypt. So yeah, they blocked the Rafah crossing, and the reason it's blocked is it's not because Israel wants to. Israel is a very pragmatic country. And in fact, they had a very benign policy towards Hamas before Hamas actually started attacking Israeli troops. When Hamas Hamas was just an Islamist organization, Israel pretty much left it alone, and in fact supported it to the extent that it served as a counterweight to Fatah and the PLO, which was Israel's perennial enemy ever since the mid 1960s, when the Fedayeen were making incursions into that country. So Israel, if Hamas wanted to establish an Islamic state with all that entails, including Sharia and all of these policies that they believed in, and not have a policy of attacking Israel, then they would have a functioning seaport. Israel would allow goods to come in. Israel would allow them to travel freely. There would be no reason for the people in Gaza to be deprived of anything from Israel's standpoint. If Hamas would just but the thing is, that's an impossible scenario because Hamas is raising to eliminate Israel. Without eliminating Israel, without getting rid of it, Hamas's chief function would disappear. So they manufacture rockets to attack Israel, send in suicide bombers, do all these things. Which, of course, if an entity does that, the country that they're attacking is not going to allow them to, it's not going to look on that kindly. So it's just a ridiculous idea that because Gaza is being punished because the people there elected Hamas. It's not a matter of electing Hamas. It's a matter of Hamas being sworn to the destruction of Israel. If Hamas would just if Hamas decided not to send rockets to Israel, not to remove the idea that Israel should be destroyed from its charter, and just would coexist. Israel is pragmatic. They, for obvious reasons, they don't care if it's a Gulf Sheikhdom or a quasi-military dictatorship, Arab dictatorship. They don't care what the form of government is, as long as that government is not trying to attack Israel. That's the only precondition that exists for diplomacy and trade, and interaction between Israel and other countries. I mean, even I think technically, even they even have diplomatic relations still with Turkey. And Erdogan has said that he wants to liberate Jerusalem with Turkish citizens. but but regardless, that going back to this idea that evangelical dispensationalist Christians are the reason that Israel is the reason that the U.S. isn't attacking Israel. That's simply not the case. If you remove them from the equation and ask yourself, what would be even better thought experiment is removing Jews from this equation. If Israel was a Buddhist state or a Hindu state, would the U.S. still support it? And would Americans still support that state? And my answer would be yes. Of course, if the alternative was an Islamic state, another Islamic state implanted in the middle of an incredibly strategic region that's crucial for world trade, and is at the center of so many potential conflicts. So it's a bit of a red herring. I mean, yes, the fact that there are evangelicals who support Israel does influence American policy, but you could say the same thing for for uh, for Saudi Arabia or these Gulf states. The fact that they have a huge lobbying organization influences how we approach them. Would there be any reason for the United States to ally with Saudi Arabia? And the answer is no. The old Twitter handle was it was actually taken from a book called The Dark Tower. There was a character in that book, which the old Twitter handle is defunct now, of course, since the Twitter account has been banned. But but again, this is just a criticism that people like Tracy make. I mean, there are other reasons for some of the critiques I've addressed, but a criticism that people like him make because he's an atheist and he despises the Bible and he despises American Christians because they have cultural values that are antithetical to his, which I mean is fine. This is a free country. You can have whatever beliefs you want. I mean, we haven't descended to the point of Canada now where they're arresting people for expressing their beliefs and assembling together. But you can have whatever views you want. But I think it's misleading to try to superimpose those beliefs onto a set of policies that have multiple origins that have nothing to do with that. I mean, I could just as easily argue that the people who are viewing this from a purely, or what they perceive to be a utilitarian perspective, or looking at it as atheists who don't like or people who are globalists who don't like the idea of a state that is centered around an ethno-linguistic religious identity. I could say that these people are looking at it from the wrong perspective, and actually and are actually out to lunch because if they're trying to find a peace solution to something that is not um, that is not going to be resolved simply by the United States stepping in and serving as an arbiter. I mean, this is something that was tried during the Clinton administration, and during the Y River peace accords and his negotiations with Ehud Barak towards the end of his presidency, and it was a complete catastrophe and resulted in the Second Intifada. So, I mean, any way you look at this, I think you have to approach this issue from a rational standpoint and look at it from a strategic point of view. Canada is sad. I didn't hear about that, the arrest in Florida. I'll have to look into that. That's surprising. Um, I think that might have more to do with the local authorities. I know you have a lot of these insane, um, Anthony Fauci fans in charge of these cities in Florida who are resisting the governor's attempt to return to normality. But anyway, that's just some of my analysis, my armchair analysis. I'm sure you're getting enough of it over the past 2 weeks. But everyone, I will see you next time. Alejandro, Tim, Tower Time, Elizabeth. I will talk to you later.